How many of you would classify yourself as one of those dreamers? A believer? This is the second week in a month-long series that is based on the Season of Nonviolence. The Season of Nonviolence is an international campaign that begins January 30th, the anniversary of Gandhi's assassination, and it runs through May, the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It's a 64-day grassroots campaign. We're in the 17th year where we celebrate not only the idea, but we begin a practice of nonviolence and of peace. And so today we talk about and really explore, what does it mean to be peaceful in our communications? There's a funny story about a man who was walking along the California coastline, and he saw this bottle in the sand, and he picked it up and he dusted it off, and it had a cork in it, and so he pulled the cork out, and a genie came out. And the genie came out, and the man said, "I can't believe this is a real bottle, and you're a genie. Are you going to grant me a wish?" And he said, I will grant you one wish." And the man said, "Well, my wife and I have always wanted to go to Hawaii, but my wife is terribly afraid to drive. So would you build a highway from California to Hawaii?" And the genie said, "Oh, I've been in that bottle for a long, long time, and that's a really hard one. Do you have anything else?" And the man thought a minute, and he said, "I'd like to build peace in all my relationships, peace in my communication. I'd like to build that." The genie scratched his head and he said, "Back to that highway, do you want 2 lanes or 4 lanes?" Sometimes the thought of building peaceful relationships in all our relationships, peace in our communications, almost seems like a daunting task, that it is impossible. But how many of you really believe it is possible to embody peace? You see, the embodiment of peace does not mean that we don't get upset. It means that whatever state we're in, we're also in an awareness of peace. And when all the dust settles, our goal is, how do I bring peace back into this? And into this is first and foremost, how do I bring peace back into my own awareness, into my own experience? That's the goal of living that life of peace. And so if we think about our relationships, relationships are the place where our greatest joys happen in relationship, and our greatest challenges happen in relationship. Relationship is truly a place where transformation takes place, where healing takes place. Would you give me the first slide? Robert Brummett, a Unity author, wrote in his book, Living Organically, he said, "Most of our life experiences seem incomplete if we have not shared them with another person. Perhaps nothing impacts the quality of our life more than the quality of our relationships. And perhaps nothing impacts the quality of our relationships more than the quality of our communication." You see, communication is the fabric. It's really the fabric and the backbone of all relationships. And if you think about it, all living creatures communicate. Our body communicates with itself. We must be able to communicate. And if we really understand communication, it is a way to transform our relationships and transform our life, because the person that we're communicating with the most is where? Sitting in your chair. That's the one that we're always in this internal dialogue and internal communication. And communication is made up of words. Words are symbols. As long as we know there have been civilization, we can find symbols that people have always sought to communicate. Words themselves are literally a form of expression, that we can take that which is unseen and bring it into the reality of something seen and heard and experienced through the power of our words. Ancient traditions always believed that our words were very, very powerful. Would you show me the next slide? How many of you have heard the word as a kid, abracadabra? How many of you knew that it's actually an Aramaic word, and the phrase, it's abracadabra, and it means, "I will create as I speak." The ancients, that's why if you've studied Judaism, they were not allowed to say the name of God, because names were very, very powerful. And the name of God was to be so powerful and so revered that they could not even speak it, that words carried incredible power. There's a story of a man who was at a New Thought seminar, and the instructor was talking about this, the power of our words, and really being mindful about what you say and why you say what you do say and why you don't say what you withhold. And a gentleman stood up and said, "You know what? I just don't believe that. I do not believe that our words are really powerful." And the speaker said, "Shut up, you old stupid fool, and sit down. You don't know what you're talking about." And the man's face turned beet red, and the audience gasped, and the speaker said, "Now do you see what I'm talking about?" That there really is something to the power of our words. There are a lot of different scriptures that have a lot to say about this. Would you show me the first slide, the next slide? In Buddhism, Buddha said, "A person is born with an axe in his mouth. He whose speech is unwholesome cuts himself with that axe." From Islam, the next slide. "The messenger of God took his tongue and said, 'Refrain this.'" The next slide. From the Old Testament, Proverbs, "The power of life and death are in the tongue. Whoever guards his mouth preserves his life, preserves his spirit, preserves his energy." You see, words are energy in formation. I was meditating one day and I saw the word information, that our words are energy in formation. That's where information comes from. And we're always working with our words. The next slide from the New Testament in Matthew, these words are attributed to Jesus. "For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. For what comes out of the mouth proceeds from the heart," in Matthew. Our words have so much power. I remember when I was a kid, probably 7 or 8 years old, my church was having a big yard sale. And so we all arrived at the church probably at 5 o'clock in the morning. And we were getting things set up and lined up. And I was helping my mom and I was helping other people. And this woman, to this day, I remember her name. Her name was Jackie. She came over and she looked at a little space. I had put some stuff out and she said, "Darlene, you have a gift for organizing." And I thought, me? I have a gift? I have a gift for organizing. Through her words, "You have a gift for organizing." So what do you think I did? I spent that whole morning organizing because all of a sudden I had a gift. I better put that gift to use. It didn't stop. I went home, I went in my room and I thought, well, I have a gift for organizing. I need to do something about this. My mother still talks about that day and reminded me often afterwards of my gift for organizing. Ken Dyer wrote, "Communication remains the most powerful motivator in life. One communication can change the direction of a person's life. A teacher or a parent can influence a child significantly with a comment. Often it is the lightest throwaway comment that impacts us profoundly." How many of you ever had someone tell you you were good at something and it felt good? How many of you have had someone tell you you were not good at something and it didn't feel good? Now let's just take a survey. How many of you at some point in time had somebody tell you you could not sing, just mouth the words? How many of you to this day still feel self-conscious about that? Yeah. And most of us, when that happened, we were just little things. But words are incredibly powerful. Well, you see, as an individual being, we are a being of spirit. We are expressions of the one power, the one spirit, God. Every face, every person, every form of creation is its own beautiful, unique expression of all that is God. And we are in the business of expressing. Express yourself. And a question that we can always ask ourselves is, what part of myself am I expressing? Have you ever shown up and acted like a you-know-what, and you thought, why did I think that was a good idea at the time? And then those other times that we show up and we find the courage or whatever it is we need to do, and it just lifts us up. We think, I'm glad I was able to dig deep. I was glad I was able to show up like that. That life is truly about expressing ourselves. And when we bring mindfulness, that's why all the scriptures talk about the tongue. When we bring mindfulness, our tongue is connected to our breath, our breathing, our spirit. And through mindfulness, as we begin to think about, what am I communicating? What am I saying to myself? What am I censoring inside of myself? What am I speaking to another? When we bring mindfulness to this, it will always return us to ourself. And the great spiritual teaching is that as we bring awareness to it, we gain insight into what I call our big S self, as opposed to our little s, just personality self. That it is our infinite self that we're all seeking to express and experience. That as long as we have skin on, we are whole and we are perfect, and yet we are not finished. You see, there's a difference. You can be perfect in your creation and still not be finished in your realization of your perfection. That as long as we have skin on, that we are still not finished. We're still growing in the awareness of the realization of our perfection, of ourself as whole, of ourself as pure love and pure light. And so I like the teaching that comes from the Buddhist tradition that really talks about communication. If you know much about Buddhism, there are the Eight Noble Truths, which help lead one to liberation. I summarize liberation by saying, help me cease to be the cause of my own suffering. That when we cease to be the cause of our own suffering, we begin to we're either in our own way or we are being the way. We're being the way of love, being the way of light, and all of these things that we're here and we're meant to embody and anchor the potential of heaven on earth. The Buddhist tradition talks about three things and then points to a fourth. The first one is that in our communication to always ask ourselves what I'm about to say and the story that I'm telling myself, is it true? Is it true? What would happen if overnight all of us had the Pinocchio syndrome? I mean, if you really think about it, there are a lot of businesses that would go out of business. There are a lot of politicians that would go out of business. There are a lot of ministers that would go out of business. There's a lot of relationships that would blossom or within that if all of a sudden we could not withhold the truth, life would change dramatically. There's something very powerful when we will ask ourselves, is what I am saying true? And if I feel the need to color the truth, direct somebody, some people are very masterful. They'll say, well, I didn't tell a lie, but they told you everything possible to lead you in a different direction. Well, that's not the kind of we're not talking about such crafty communication because you've created such a web of confusion for your own self. But is it true? Gandhi, one of the individuals that is a part of this season of nonviolence, he's part of the inspiration. There's a story that a mother took her child to Gandhi and said, my son will not stop eating milk candy. I can't get him to eat his food. He just eats up all the milk candy. Will you please talk to him? And Gandhi said, I see. Bring him back next week the same time. And the mother was disappointed because in India she had traveled a long way to get there. But a week later, she brought her son back and she said, Baba Gandhi, will you please tell my son that he cannot eat just milk candy, he must eat. And Gandhi spoke to the little boy and said, son, you must eat what your mother gives you. And if she gives you milk candy, you can have a little bit, but you must listen to your mother. And the little boy said, yes, Baba Gandhi. And the woman got up to leave and she said, I just have to ask, why did I need to come back for that? And he said, well, because last week I too was eating too much milk candy. And Gandhi shared that story. Gandhi had a saying that said, don't speak unless you can improve upon the silence. And always let your words be true. And so the first thing that we're called into practice is to ask ourselves, is what I am saying true? And if I'm feeling that I can't, you can't handle the truth. Remember, what's the name of that movie? A Few Good Men. There you go, Kat. Thank you. That line, you can't handle the truth. Sometimes we feel like people can't handle the truth, but what if we're keeping each other small? What if we are keeping each other codependent? What if we are keeping our own self small because we're afraid we can't handle the truth when it is truly the truth that would liberate us? And so the first one is to really be mindful and asking, is what I'm about to say true? And is what I am telling myself true? The second one, is it kind? Now there's a big difference between kind and nice. You know, in the South, we have a reputation for being nice. But you know as well as I do, there's times we walk up to people and say, bless your heart. And what we're really thinking is, you're so stupid. Amen. You know that happens. Is it kind is not necessarily nice, because tough love does not always look nice. But tough love is the most powerful form of love there is, because it says, I love you enough that I will not let you settle for less. You see, kindness, there is a way to be kind and still be honest. People will often ask, well, what if I have to choose between honesty and kindness? The point is, choose both. It is not an either or, it is always a both. And the kindness stems from your heart connection. It's about being real and being true. There was a show on television called Brat Camp, I think was the name of it, years ago. It was filmed in the mountains of Arizona. And they worked with children that were at high risk, teenagers, teenage boys predominantly, who had come to this wilderness camp. It was a really rugged camp. They worked hard. They did a lot. But they were on the verge of going to prison, and something had to change in their life. And these boys, as a general rule, were very well versed at hate speech. Did you know today that a lot of public schools literally have a policy against hate speech? That it has gotten so prevalent that there need policies in school to curb the hate speech. But the good news for that, to me, is they're realizing that hate speech should not be tolerated. We should not be able to judge people and hate on people out loud, so to speak. But these kids were, if you grow up in an environment that is hateful, that hate is passed along. And so when we see people that are carrying that hate and carrying that pain, most of the time they've inherited it. And so we're all healing generations from the past. Sometimes people just did the best they could, but they passed along that hate and that bitterness and that hurt. And if we've inherited and we've absorbed a lot of hurt, often it comes out in hateful, unkind ways. So these boys are taught anytime they're using hate speech or profanity, or even and especially if they're talking down on themselves, as they're out with their backpacks typically weigh 40 to 50 pounds already. Every time an unkind word comes out, they have to pick up a rock and put it in the backpack. Because what they are being taught is the weight of your own words. And I thought that's very powerful, because it is true. Each of us every day live with the weight of our own words. So this Buddhist teaching, which is also truly an interfaith teaching, is it true and is it kind? And then the third one is it necessary? Now let's confess again. How many of us have given somebody advice this week and they did not ask for it? All right, now don't raise your partner's hand this time. How many of you have given advice this week and it wasn't asked for? How many of you have gotten nervous in a situation and just started bumbling? I call that, on the highway there are rumble strips. Incidentally, yesterday I went horseback riding and literally saw a sign that said rumble strips. How often do you see that? But it was part of my talk. But you know what rumble strips are? If you get off the road, you start hitting those strips to get you back on. And in the mountains, we need some rumble strips because you can't go very far or you got a big mumble on your hands. But when you hit those rumble strips, they're meant to bring you back in line. A great practice about your speech, and is it necessary, is this just mumble speech? And if it is, let me get myself back online. Because people tend to gravitate into one of two ways. We process our world, we process information differently, and some people are more likely just to talk. Other people are more likely to not talk. And so when we ask ourselves, is it necessary? For some people, it's a willingness to say, it is necessary, I finally need to speak up. But for a lot of other people, it's really bringing awareness to how much talking am I doing, how much advice am I giving, how much am I putting out there that is really not necessary at all. And beyond that, what is the motivator behind it? What is it in me that feels like I need to fill up the space? And so we bring mindfulness by asking, is it true? Is it kind? Is it necessary? And then what completes this circle is, am I really listening? You know, the old saying, there's a reason we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Is to listen. It's like, listen. Just really, really listen. But how often are we thinking about what we're going to say? I've noticed in my life, I especially used to be terrible about that. I've gotten better, I work on it, but in my career, I was trained in such a way I always sort of needed to be one step ahead, and I've realized that I was never listening. Well, that's the worst thing you can do. And so to just slow down and learn to listen. Would you give me that last song? When I was in the seminary, the most challenging part and the most rewarding part for me in being in the seminary was when I did my hospital chaplaincy. I dreaded it, but I had to do it. And I thought I dreaded it for all the obvious reasons. If you don't necessarily work in a hospital, there's a pretty good reason you may not want to go in a hospital. And as being there as a chaplain and working with people, I was just nervous about it. So you know when you don't want to do something, how the universe says, she really needs to learn this lesson? So I got assigned to the hospital in Kansas City that was the worst, that was known for having the worst stuff. And it started right off the bat. Well, as part of the hospital chaplaincy training, one of the things that you do is you write what are called verbatims. So for example, if I were in the hospital for 8 hours, at the end of my day, I would sit down and I would recall one situation, one encounter that I had, and I would write verbatim everything that happened. And after turning in a week of these, I sat down with the main director, and he said, I want to talk to you about something. And he handed me back all my papers, and there were like 50 times it was circled the words, just listening. He said, you talked about all these things you did, and you went into the room and you just listened. He said, so did you really listen, or were you just hoping you could get out of there as fast as you could? And my confession was, I was just hoping I could get out of there as fast as I could. I was making my rounds, doing what I needed to do. And he said, so you need to be with this idea of why you think listening is not important. And so next week, you cannot write just listening in any of your verbatims. So that brought a level of mindfulness to it. So when I did my rounds this time, I couldn't just listen and want to hurry up and get out of there. I literally took the time to connect. I realized that I could be present to another individual. And what began to happen, my own fears began to come up. You see, I was afraid if I went to the hospital, someone was going to say, why is my 6-year-old son in a coma? Why is my husband paralyzed and we have 2 small children? Why this? Why that? I knew those questions were coming, and the truth was, I did not know. And I felt like I needed to have something to say that would satisfy those questions. Well, what I realized is that through the power of listening, that when I would sit with a person and honest to goodness listen to whatever they said, quite often when it was time for me to respond, the only response was, I don't know why things like this happen. The only thing I do know is that it is sad right now. And the only thing I do know is that maybe it's an opportunity to dig inside and to find out, what do I believe? What can I hold on to and stand on to in this time of crisis? And as I made room for that not knowing, the quality of those connections really began to grow. But the greatest quality of connection that began to grow, which really surprised me, was in my own self. Because you see, when I would get completely present and listen, that's when the guidance would begin to come. My last night in hospital chaplaincy, I spent the night at the hospital. I was on call overnight. And I was called to a room. Exactly what I didn't want to happen happened. I got the call at about 2 o'clock in the morning. I went to a room, and there was a woman who had been diagnosed with cancer that had spread throughout her body. Her husband was standing there with her. And when I walked in, he looked at me, and he grabbed me sort of by the shoulder, and he pulled me out of the room, down the hall a little bit. It was very clear that she was at the end, ready to let go. And he looked at me and he said, I love that woman in there more than anything. All her life, she's listened to me. And so I have to tell her to hold on, because if I say let go, I can't live with myself. And his words were, so you tell me what the hell God wants me to do right now. I took that deep breath because I did not know what to say. By this time, thank God, I had gotten more comfortable listening. And as I took that deep breath and I paused, I literally heard the words come in. And what came out of my mouth was, can you tell her you trust her? And when I heard those words, I thought, that's beautiful, that's brilliant. And that did not come from anywhere that I knew how to generate it. It came through me. He looked at me, he went out, he went back in the room, and within 15 minutes, his wife let go. And later, the man told his family what happened, and he had peace around it because of that. I went home, and I was utterly exhausted from a week of being on call, and I was not sure that that's the way it should have ended. I was just really distraught. And so I went home. It was in the morning. I made myself an egg sandwich, and as I sat down, someone had given me a book. The title of it had Surrender in this title. Someone had given me a book that was on my kitchen table. It had been there for a couple of weeks, and finally I picked it up. And I'm thinking, why did this happen? Why did the woman die? And all of these things. And I opened the book, and it fell open to a page that says, she has a God, and you are not it. And I thought, wow. And when I did that last verbatim, I wrote it on that one. And the instructor said, Darlene, what I want to ask you is, can you now trust yourself? Can you trust yourself to speak the truth? Can you trust yourself to speak what is kind and what is necessary? And can you trust yourself to listen? Because my greatest prayer had always been, I want to hear the voice of God. I want to hear guidance. I want my own internal guidance. And you see, the reason that this teaching about communication shows up in every tradition is because the way that we become present and available to hear that inner voice is when we learn to listen. And until we can speak what is our own truth, true for ourselves, we will never be able to connect with our own true self. So this week to me is an exciting week and an opportunity for us to practice. And is what I'm saying, is it true? Is it kind? Is it necessary? And am I really listening? Really listening? There's a song that will help us anchor this. And it goes like this. I am that I am. has sent me to this now moment. Here I am that I am, has sent me to this now moment. Here I am to be the voice and to be the heart through which heaven is made known on earth. To be the voice and to be the heart through which heaven is made known on earth. Sing it with me. I am that I am, has sent me to this now moment. Here I am that I am.